If I say the words father figure, you would probably picture Iroh talking Zuko through his repeated emotional crises, or perhaps Obi-Wan Kenobi guiding Luke Skywalker down the path of the Jedi, or maybe Vander gently but sternly teaching Vi what it means to be a leader. In any case, those men and numerous others in fiction fit a particular archetype. They are aged or aging, have experienced significant struggle in their own lives, and have as a result gained wisdom which they wish to pass on to their surrogate sons and daughters. They are loving and kind, but also insist that their mentees shoulder their burdens and persevere through their own respective difficulties. They have, by and large, gone through hell and seek to spare their wards of the same suffering if at all possible. And they are typically paragons of virtue, experiencing little, if any, character growth over the course of the story, which will naturally focus on the arc of the hero whom they instruct. On that last point, Vinland Saga flips this trope on its head. Although Thorfinn is the central character throughout the series, Askeladd is the driving force behind most of the major events in the first season. Askeladd experiences change even as Thorfinn stagnates. Askeladd is far from a model of good character, and yet he still fits the mold of father figure, albeit not without some reshaping. If you had only seen the first few episodes of this anime, that statement might shock you. Because when we first meet Askeladd, we learn that he is a shrewd, deceptive mercenary who doesn't remotely care about honoring the terms of a duel that he had lost fair and square. There is a small shred of honor even in that scene, however. Askeladd could have had his men kill or enslave the now helpless Icelandic crew, mostly young men and teens, but instead he stays true to his word and lets them leave, his contracted assassination completed. If that minor act of mercy tempts you to believe that he's really not so bad, let me disabuse you of that notion.
Let no one escape. We don't want any rats.
Well, does he at least have a soft spot for Thorfinn? After all, he let the kid live when he could have had him thrown overboard or killed him any number of ways after Thorfinn challenged him to a duel. No, not really. The main reason Askeladd doesn't kill Thorfinn is simply because he has no real reason to kill Thorfinn. So I suppose we can at least say in Askeladd's favor that he is not a unbridled sadist. While the looting, pillaging, and murdering in which he partakes are obviously and grossly immoral, Askeladd doesn't seem to take much joy in them. In fact, he doesn't seem to take much joy in anything. Doesn't seem to have a particularly strong desire to even continue living. When Thorfinn not so stealthily sneaks into Askeladd's room and the Viking captain lets events play out without intervening, the obvious interpretation is that he trusted Thorfinn had inherited his father's sense of honor and wouldn't exact vengeance upon a helpless sleeping man. And while I certainly think that interpretation is true, as the show says, I believe Askeladd's inaction had a deeper motivation. Askeladd had to know that there was a non-zero chance that Thorfinn's emotions would overwhelm him and he'd behead Askeladd. Honor be damned. I mean, he was a 6-year-old child, and therefore rather vulnerable to strong emotion. All it would have taken was a single momentary flare of passion, and Askeladd's head would be rolling on the floor. But Askeladd seemed to be okay with that. He didn't particularly care if he died, because he wasn't living for anything. While Askeladd is obviously incredibly skilled at what he does, that is, manipulating people and situations to get what he and his crew want, and while we do see him take some pleasure in successful raids and daring stratagems, those are clearly fleeting moments of happiness that give way to nothing. Nothing meaningful, anyway. The thing is, though, Askeladd realizes that. It's clear that he knows that he is devoid of purpose. While the men of his crew are driven by their base instincts, their purpose being wealth, riches, glory in battle, and good food. Seriously, there are so many shots of Vikings eating roasted meat in the show. Askeladd doesn't really care. He has progressed past the endless pursuit of hedonistic satisfaction to the point where he is simply going through the motions because what else is there? And true to form, he's rather condescending towards those who still chase after material goods.
Pretty terrible, isn't it? A slave to money holds a whip, just so he can act like he owns a slave bought by money. The truth is, all of us are slaves to something.
Thorfinn is a slave to his desire for vengeance. Askeladd's men are slaves to their greed and lust. Thorkel is a slave to his yearning for glory and battle, and I am a slave to double-stuffed Oreos. No matter how free we might style ourselves, there is doubtless some vice, some unhealthy appetite or ambition that has an iron grip on our wills. The thing is, though, It's not inherently wrong to have our wills constrained and directed toward a particular end. The problem is that we tend to choose an unworthy goal to which to devote ourselves. Most often that goal will be like that of the show's characters, self-serving and driven by our base emotions. At some point, perhaps, we will find that wealth, carnal pleasures, and chocolatey creamy goodness do not, in fact, satisfy us. And perhaps we'll find other hedonistic pursuits, or perhaps we will, as Askeladd did, fall into apathy, merely going through the motions that we have preordained for ourselves without deriving any meaning for our daily lives. So what then? The answer is obvious: find purpose. Find a worthy cause to which to devote yourself. One might say enslave yourself, fully submit yourself to something greater than you are. This is eventually what Askeladd does. And just to be clear, choosing a higher good does not sanctify any actions that you take in pursuing that end. The means by which you obtain your goal absolutely matter, but we'll get into that discussion later, after we discuss the long-awaited duel between Askeladd and Thorfinn. This is the first time we ever see Askeladd truly worried, as he realizes that Thorfinn could in fact win this fight, and Askeladd's pride demands that he not lose his life by being bested in front of all of his men. So, he manipulates Thorfinn.
Your father. What was his name again?
Pushing the teen into a rage that causes him to lose composure and fight recklessly, letting Askeladd win the duel easily. And thus begins Askeladd's mentorship of Thorfinn. Previously, he had merely been using the kid to fill whatever role he needed, confident that Thorfinn's pursuit of vengeance would keep him in line. Now, Askeladd actually, if indirectly and rather brutally, begins to teach Thorfinn something. Namely, that you can't let your passions get the better of you, that you have to pursue your goals with precision and firm control over your emotions. If Thorfinn were to learn that lesson, he might actually stand a chance at beating Askeladd in a duel, something the man himself admits.
The day might come when I actually lose to you.
And this is the first time we see Askeladd struggle with his mortality. While I do think that he didn't really care about whether he lived or died that night in the hut, I also believe that the too close duel with Thorfinn awoke something within him, pushed him to realize that he could and would fall on the field of battle, and that before that happens, he wants to accomplish something. He wants to leave behind a legacy and not merely a pile of useless gold. I won't take you through all the details and revelations of Askeladd's plan to ensure the independence for the country of Wales, but suffice it to say that his modus operandi is the complete opposite of Thorfinn's. He keeps his true intentions hidden, even from his closest friend.
I've been with him for over a decade, but we don't really discuss much.
And he acts with precision and only out of cold, emotionless calculation. And as we will discover, this isn't the first time Askeladd has carried out a plot in such manner. On the eve of his final move that will secure the safety for his mother's people, Askeladd tells Thorfinn, whom he has once again bested in an ill-advised duel, the story of how he killed his own father, who had taken his mother as a slave from Wales and then left her to die when she fell sick.
I'll teach you how to kill a person you despise.
Askeladd did not strike his father down in an honorable duel, but rather he waited, training day in and day out, ingratiating himself with his father and the household before ultimately murdering his sleeping father in cold blood. In other words, he is telling Thorfinn that the path the youth has chosen cannot succeed, that to attain the revenge he so passionately desires, he must relinquish the sense of honor that Thorfinn holds so dear, which of course Thorfinn won't do.
This story's about what a fool you are.
The cost to kill Askeladd is to become Askeladd, which, as I just said, is the one thing Thorfinn cannot do, despite the fact that he has done far worse things, but we're not going into Thorfinn's psychology right now. Askeladd's advice here is quite similar in nature to that of any number of father figures throughout fiction. What you do defines you. If you pursue evil in the name of doing good, you are still doing evil. The form of the advice, however, is quite different. While many mentors would say, do not make the mistakes I made, few would say, do not become the man I am today, which is exactly what Askeladd is telling Thorfinn, even as he wholeheartedly embraces his depravity.
In the end, I'm just a damned Viking.
One might be tempted to call Askeladd a hypocrite, a man who knows what is right and just, but does the opposite nonetheless. But I am hesitant to apply that label, mostly because I think it carries with it an implication of lack of awareness, implying that said hypocrite does not truly realize the contradiction between his words and actions. Askeladd knows that sacrificing an innocent woman as bait for King Sweyn's assassin isn't moral, that murdering dozens of civilians in the name of feeding his army was grossly wrong, and even that beheading the King of Denmark in cold blood was no less a sin than killing his own father. But he did those things anyway, no matter what they cost him personally, because they served his goal of a free and independent Wales. In that way, he's akin to Lúthien from Andor, who was willing to sacrifice his very soul for the sake of the rebellion, or Taravangian from the Stormlight Archive, who is willing to commit atrocity after atrocity, knowing how wrong they are, for the sake of human survival. Askeladd would not, could not, give up on his goal once it had implanted itself in his mind, once he had rediscovered the passion that led him to kill his father all those years ago. His mother would be avenged, and her people kept safe, no matter what it cost him. And yet he does not believe that others should act as he did. When Thorfinn rushes to the mortally wounded Askeladd, watching his chance at vengeance slowly, inexorably fade away, crying out in rage and anguish, Askeladd has one final piece of advice.
Don't get stuck in a worthless place like this forever.
Askeladd knew all too intimately the consuming, destructive nature of revenge. Although he did let it corrupt him, empty him out, and drive him to do unspeakable deeds in the name of vengeance, he retained at least one crucial shred of goodness. He wanted others, or at least one other, to be better than he was. He saw in Thorfinn the potential to be a true warrior, one who fights not for his own gain or because he hates those in front of him, but only because he loves those behind him. And in case those final moments of Askeladd's life weren't enough to drive that point home, he reappears from beyond the grave as Thorfinn visits him within a dream, and the two watch hundreds of warriors apparently trapped in eternal battle. It's hard for me to emphasize just how impactful this scene is. Since Thorfinn fled the life of a Viking and his now hopeless quest for vengeance, he has been struggling without great effect to shed himself of his past sins, to forget who he was and what he did. In this place of perpetual death, which according to Askeladd is simply where warriors live in the real world, Thorfinn witnesses all those whom he has killed, and he weeps for them, for what he did to them. True to form, Askeladd has little time for this.
Oh, brother.
But more importantly, when Thorfinn is on the verge of being dragged back down into this place of slaughter, back into the resignation that he is and always will be a monster, Askeladd once again sacrifices himself, leaping into the fray above which he had been sitting, allowing Thorfinn the chance to escape this place.
Go! And take the ones you've killed with you! That is your battle, Thorfinn!
And take those you killed with you. What a powerful statement. One might think that in order to be healed and redeemed, Thorfinn should leave his past atrocities behind, that he should stop dwelling on them, even forget about them. Well, yes and no. We can allow our sins and failings to dominate our psyches and prevent us from ever growing in virtue since we are so racked with guilt, or we can compartmentalize them, forget about them, pretend they never happened, pretend we did not act as we once did. Those are the two extremes. And as you, dear viewer, certainly know, we want to land more in the middle, in the golden mean, one might say. That is, we should admit that we sinned, and it is because of those failures that we can become better. We should carry our misdeeds with us, not to hold us back or weigh us down, but rather as reminders to never again be the men or women we were when we committed those transgressions. The tragedy of Askeladd is that he knew the path to better himself, to rise above his base instincts and his desire for vengeance, but he refused to take it. And yet he wishes Thorfinn would take that road. In that, he resembles many other far more virtuous father figures throughout fiction. He desires that the life of his child would be better than his own.